Hello, and thanks for joining our Facebook live chat about heading back to school with food allergies. This live chat is brought to you by Kids with Food Allergies, also known as KFA, the largest food allergy support network and a division of the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. I'm Monica Williams, the Education Program Manager for AFA and the moderator for this live event. I am so pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Michael Pistner, aka Dr. Mike, who is a well-known innovative pediatric allergist and no stranger to the AFA family. He has been a support for kids with food allergies for many years. Dr. Mike is the new Director of Food Allergy Advocacy Education at Mass General Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. His special interests are food allergy, anaphylaxis advocacy, and education. He also is an advocate for simplifying relationships between school and health and the medical home and between pediatric allergists and pediatricians. We are so happy to have you, Dr. Mike. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get started with our questions. So we have a few questions from a few families about school forms. So if you just want to open it up and explain to the families, which forms do they need to turn into their school and where can they access or get these forms?
Well, one of the things that we're going to want to drive home and that the forms are going to help with is communicating the basic food allergy management strategies that are going to need to be implemented for these kiddos. So what these forms are going to help do is make sure that prevention strategies and emergency preparedness are going to be implemented at all times and in all circumstances within the school and the school building. The first set of forms that are important to think of, and many schools have what's called individual healthcare plans. And these are oftentimes led by the school nurse and filled out for the individual student. In some cases, some students have what's called a 504, which is an individual healthcare plan that then the school will legally need to implement. Now, the individual healthcare plan and 504 would have policies or would have steps that need to be put into place for prevention, avoiding allergic reaction, label reading, making sure that there's no cross contact, making sure that there's no hidden ingredients in the foods that a child eats. And then also emergency preparedness is going to be discussed and carried out within this individual health care plan or 504. Having people who are trained to administer epinephrine to a child who has an allergic reaction and people who would be able to recognize the symptoms of allergic reaction and know what to do. And then also have training within the school so people would be able to implement this. Also, a very important form that has to do with emergency preparedness is the emergency care plan. Some people refer to it as an anaphylaxis allergy plan, and anaphylaxis emergency care plan. Depending on who you are and where you're from, people might refer to it a little differently. There's a great new example from the American Academy of Pediatrics, their emergency care plan that that helps people who are caring for children with a food allergy to know what their specific triggers are, and then also know what symptoms would necessitate epinephrine. Now, epinephrine is the first-line treatment of anaphylaxis. It works quickly, and prompt treatment with epinephrine, as outlined in these emergency care plans, can take a severe allergic reaction and stop it in its tracks. And so the earlier someone treats with epinephrine, when people are experiencing anaphylaxis, the less likely they might have a second phase of anaphylaxis, the less likely they would have a prolonged hospitalization, and the less likely they are to have life-threatening experience.
So we have a few more questions from the Culpepper family, the Goins family, and Goldbaum family. Their questions are around, what is the difference between SelfCarry and SelfAdminister?
So if a child self-carries, they may bring their auto-injectors with them to wherever they go. In some schools, they may have large school buildings where they're being passed from one caregiver to another, in which case sometimes the child having the auto injectors on them, perhaps in a fanny pack or going with their teacher, is going to be something important. So now you can have young kids who aren't developmentally ready to self-administer. You can have kids self-carry, but what's going to be really important in those cases is not relying necessarily on those auto-injectors. Knowing that these are little kids, they might lose the things that they're supposedly carrying. So the school should always have a backup. But the young ones can self-carry as long as they wouldn't be able to get to the auto-injectors, as long as they wouldn't be able to accidentally put them off when playing with them, and as long as also they wouldn't lose them and then that be their only auto-injector and then they'd be without epinephrine. Now self-administration is different. In self-administration, the kiddo will need to be developmentally ready and prepared to be able to actually administer epinephrine to themselves. Now, this depends on the individual child. Now, when there are kids who are going to be responsible for taking care of themselves, and now they're old enough to do that, or they are walking by themselves to the school bus and afterwards going to activities on their own, then those kids should be able to self-administer. Now, if a child isn't developmentally able to self-administer at that point, then they should be supervised by somebody who would be able to recognize allergic reaction and would be able to administer epinephrine. So everyone is a bit different, but the range that people have used is around age 9, might be on the earlier side, and some kids they may not be developmentally ready until a bit older, so you could even get some 12 and 13-year-olds who might not feel comfortable with it.
So now that you've told us all about the different types of epinephrine, can you sort of give us an example or sort of walk us through the actual options for epinephrine auto-injectors and how to use them?
All right, so epinephrine is I mentioned what it is. So it is a fast-acting, safe medicine that is administered in a very short and skinny needle. Now, currently, there are multiple auto injectors available in the United States now. Now, the thing is this, is that people's providers may give them a prescription for one or more of these, but the important thing is that people are trained and able to give it and that they feel comfortable with it. So using a training device to train is going to be really critical. Now, on the market now, there are EpiPen, trade name. There are EpiPen generic. And those are the ones that both of those are going to have this device with the blue safety and the orange needle end. And I'm going to go through this. There's also the generic epinephrine, Adrenaclick generic. So now, this gets really confusing, and sometimes people may get product switches at the pharmacy, and this is where you want to know what you were trained on, what your trainer is, and what you're expecting. And so some of the language that they may use is generic epinephrine. Well, we have two generic epinephrines now. We have the Mylan generic EpiPen and the Adrenaclick generic epinephrine. Different devices. And then there's also the AuviQ, and so these are the currently available devices. Now, I'll go through how to administer each of these. And so the EpiPen and generic EpiPen would come in a carrying case, and you take it out of the carrying case. You then hold in the hand that you write with. I'm a righty, so it's in my right hand. Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. The blue is the safety. Once the safety is off, pressure on the orange side will release a short and skinny needle. Now, when you press with gentle and firm pressure, it's going to release a spring and make a short or a pop. count on that and don't let it scare you and don't flinch back, because then you'd lose your dose. I'm getting on my buckets here for this. So yeah, so I think that we might have lost the feed for a moment, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I've now taken off the blue safety. Pressure on the orange tip would release the needle. Now, you would put any of the auto-injectors halfway between the knee and the hip, not straight into the thigh, not totally out on the side, but in the meaty part, and then pressure for 3 seconds for the EpiPen, generic and EpiPen. 1, 2, 3. And then the person got the dose. You want to be careful not to put your thumb over what you think is the safety side, because if you got it wrong, then that's another emergency. Now the Adrenaclick generic, you have to take it out of its carrying case. You hold it in the hand that you write with. Now you have to take off, there's an extra step here. You have to take off the needle protecting end. Now I have taken that off, and now there's a safety. I take off the safety side. Now pressure on the red needle end is going to release the needle. Now I make sure that I don't have anything in my pockets, because it's not going to go through my cell phone. And it is designed, all of these are designed to go through one thin layer of clothing, but you want to be careful of the seams. So now, halfway between the knee and the hip, in the meaty part of the thigh, this one's a 10-second hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Got the dose. Same deal, don't put your thumb over what you think is the safety side. Now, if you're getting a sense, this gets a little complicated, because all caregivers need to be trained on the device that the child has. So in a school, there could be many different devices that the different people responsible for the kids are being trained on. So this is important. Again, getting our hands on these trainers is going to be key. So here's the AlviQ. It has an outer case that you take the AlviQ out.
This trainer contains no needle or drug.
It talks to you.
Wow. If you are ready to use, pull off red safety guard.
It's telling me to pull off the red safety guard.
Not ready to use, replace the outer case.
I'm ready.
To inject, place black end against outer thigh, then press firmly and hold in place for 5 seconds.
It's telling me to place the black end against the outer thigh.
Inject, place black end against outer thigh, then press firmly and hold in place for 5 seconds.
And I give it a firm press.
5,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Injection complete.
Got my dose. Now, if this was someone actually experiencing anaphylaxis, we may not want to have them upright, but you'd never be able to see what I just did if I was lying down. Another thing is that in the little ones, you'll want to make sure that they don't move quickly or thrash, because once the needle is in the thigh, if they move, it can cause a laceration.
Okay. Wow, thank you so much for doing that reenactment of how to use the epinephrine auto-injectors, because they seem very complicated, but then, you know, like you said, you need to know how to use them.
You know, I just realized one thing is that once we determine a kid has anaphylaxis, that's when the first line treatment, and again, following the allergy action plans, the anaphylaxis action plans, is going to say epinephrine. So now, when you give epinephrine, you're giving it because someone's experiencing anaphylaxis. And every time someone has anaphylaxis, then you'll need to call 911. And just remember that you're not calling 911 because you gave epinephrine. You're calling 911 because a child just had a severe allergic reaction, and they might need more than just the epinephrine that you just gave them. You don't want to delay giving epinephrine, so that's why they say give epinephrine, and then call 911.
Great information, and actually we reviewed some of that information in our newly diagnosed webinar, which families can find at kidswithfoodallergies.org if they want more information. So now that we've touched on those pieces in the school forums, let's move on, because we have a few questions regarding accommodations in the cafeteria and whether the school can provide safe food for a child with food allergies. So can a cafeteria really accommodate food allergies, you think?
Sure. It takes training and it takes policy and procedure. And so currently we're lucky to have some really great resources. Voluntary CDC guidelines talk about how to create policies that can prevent accidental ingestion. And there are definitely things that nutrition services in schools and cafeterias can put into place to make it a safe eating situation. People who are serving and preparing food for children with food allergies need to know how to read a label. They need to know about hidden ingredients. People who are cleaning need to know about cross-contact and how to clean to prevent cross-contact. And so what this involves is when safely feeding kiddos with a food allergy, it takes training and it takes the creation of policy, but it's totally doable.
Okay. Wow. So we have another question from the Williams family. So their question is, should their child sit at an allergy or nut-free table? And how should they make sure that they're not sitting alone or feeling left out?
Well, isolation can be a challenging situation. And one of the things we're never going to want is a kiddo to be isolated just because they have a food allergy. Now, the issue of specific allergen restriction is one that is going to take consideration from schools about the specific child and their age, and then also the school and their resources. So the young kids are exploring their environment with their hands in their mouths, and kids who are between the age of 2 and 5 can put their hands or an object in their mouth up to 40 times an hour. And so the younger kids in kindergarten, first grade, they may still be exploring their environment with their hands. They may still be picking their nose, rubbing their eyes, and cross-contact can easily turn into an oral exposure. And so if there is a classroom where children are eating food and then they are learning and playing, in order to prevent an accidental exposure, the teachers responsible for that class will need to effectively prevent cross-contact. And some places decide that the resources that would go into preventing cross-contact are so great that sometimes specific allergen restriction for some of the allergens may be something that they choose to implement in the younger age groups. And sometimes offering a place where some specific allergens aren't allowed, like the nut-safe table, may be a way that some of the schools may approach it. Now, in the older age groups in middle school and high school, where the kids are really great at being able to prevent their allergen by good hand washing, they themselves, many of them, can read labels and they know not to grab food and put their hands in their mouths, and hopefully some of them are not picking their nose anymore. But those kids, it may be unnecessary to have any specific allergen restriction because these are self-managers. Okay. So do you feel that schools, so the Goins family, they received a recommendation from their doctor to find a nut-free school, but there aren't any nut-free schools in her neighborhood. What kind of advice could you offer her? Now again, in building what I just kind of talked about, the most important thing is really going to be policies that go towards the effective management of food allergies. Not necessarily one particular food allergy like only nuts, but now we're having so many children in our schools that are allergic to more than one food, and many who are allergic to milk, soy, wheat, many foods, not just peanuts and tree nuts. And so schools with an effective policy towards managing food allergies is going to be important. Schools that can implement their state guidelines, schools that can implement the CDC voluntary guidelines, those should be able to do a very good job protecting kiddos. Now, again, with the younger kids, having certain specific environments that may ask for specific allergen restriction may make sense. But as far as an entire nut-free school, that may not be necessary, and it may actually if people think that that's all it takes to protect kids with food allergy, then the kids who are allergic to other foods will not be protected, and there will be breakdowns, because oftentimes in the schools that are called nut-free, there's still allergen that's getting in there.
Okay. So do you think in a school where there's a substitute teacher, we had the Rich family ask this particular question, how to make sure a substitute teacher knows how to manage their child with food allergies? Should they communicate that to the substitute teacher? Or?
Well, one of the things that we're hoping, and I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, is that if the schools are implementing the CDC voluntary guidelines, they ask that all teachers, including substitute teachers, have some form of education. And so within that environment, in that particular environment, perhaps the family can find out what the policy is and who is educated. And in many cases, and this is something we haven't discussed yet, is that in the schools that have full-time school nurses, we are so lucky to have them. Okay. And those school nurses can act as the educators and can help make sure that not only the teachers but also the substitute teachers are having the important information. When anybody's going to be responsible for that kiddo, again, they're going to need to be able to implement the pillars of management, which are prevention and emergency preparedness. But if new staff filters through, they need to be trained. And again, the school nurse oftentimes is the person who really would be the go-to champion for that.
Okay. And I just wanted to say that to the families that you can also go to kidswithfoodallergies.org. We have free resources that can be shared with your child's caregiver. And so again, kidswithfoodallergies.org. You can find recipes for your kids with allergies and things like that. So we have another question about social interactions. So how can we teach a child's classmate about food allergies without making the child feel self-conscious?
Well, so each kid is different. Some kids like having a little bit of extra attention. Some kids really don't want to be singled out. And so one of the ways, again, is those guidelines and having these policies that are implemented, not just because of Jimmy in kindergarten class, but because kids in school these days have food allergies, and this is what we do to keep kids safe. And so this way, if there are policies that go into not only educating staff, but also food allergy awareness amongst the parents of kids with and without food allergy, and also food allergy awareness amongst the school, not because of Jimmy in kindergarten, but because kids in the school have food allergies, and this is what we do. They could do that during orientations. They could do that in lesson plans. This way, this can provide some of this education so the kids can feel like they want to take care of their friends and nobody necessarily feels singled out.
Okay. So that wraps it up for some of the topics. Do we have any additional questions or information that you want to share?
I guess while we're seeing if there's any additional questions, I just did want to make one comment where one of the things that we're looking forward to in the future are more states that are going to be implementing requirements for implementation of policy in schools, and then also education of staff and those who are caring for these kids. And in Massachusetts, there is a law that's currently out there that it's called SB 228, and this is going to require policy, staff education, and then also deal with availability of stock epinephrine. And so I just wanted to talk about the importance of advocacy in school, especially for food allergy and anaphylaxis.
Okay, so we have a question from our viewers, and they would like to know if you can explain again how hard you have to push to inject epinephrine autoinjector.
It is not hard, and so I'm actually going to show you. So this is an actual autoinjector, and it's going to be about the similar pressure with all of the autoinjectors. Now, this one I'm taking off the safety. The safety is now off. Now, gentle pressure on that orange, or in any of these cases, on the needle end is going to release the needle. Now, in this case, I'm using this is just like a standard business card, and now I'm putting gentle pressure with it. and that was it. Now, I don't know if you could see, but this is a very short, skinny needle. And now pressure with this type of injector, pressure keeps the needle protector down. But when I release pressure, it's just going to cover the needle. But as long as there's pressure with this type of device, and as long as there's pressure with this type of device, the needle stays in the child. So if the kid moves, the needle moves. And so keeping them very still is going to be important. Now, keeping them still is going to be extremely important with this device as well, but this device doesn't stay in for the entirety of the pressure. This device injects and then self-retracts.
All right, thank you so much for that explanation. So again, I wanted to remind everyone that they can find Safe Eats recipes on kidswithfoodallergies.org and for school lunch ideas, I'm sorry. And I just really want to thank you, Dr. Mike, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to our families and communities about kids with food allergies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.